With gas prices surging higher than ever before, fresh calls to reel back our reliance on other countries for crude are getting louder. Retired combat veteran and Democratic Missouri Senate candidate Lucas Koontz is one of those voices.
Koontz tweeted, "It's time for American oil companies to put America first. After decades of keeping us on our knees at the pump, they need to prove their loyalty."
Koontz joins us now to tell us how. Welcome, Lucas.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, so what we have here, is we have a situation where Americans are being held hostage and have been held hostage for decades by big oil. And so, we give these guys $20 billion a year in subsidies, taxpayer subsidies from the American taxpayer. And then they turn around and every excuse they can get, they take it to gouge us at the pump. And so we have a pretty simple 3-point plan on how to fix this. And the first thing we're going to do is if you drill oil in America, it stays in America. It goes towards our energy needs. It stays here and we keep it with Americans. The second thing is to cap profits at 5%. And then any profits over 5%, we're going to put towards investing in the next generation of energy technology. And lastly, there needs to be accountability. So if you break these laws, you go to jail.
Yeah, with the oil companies, it's kind of, we hear this all the time right now with the gas prices rising. People will say to others, oh, well, we all have to do our part. We're helping Ukrainians, so just pay a little bit more. Everybody's got to do their part. But nobody asks the companies to do their part. Their part would be to lower their prices. They're making off like bandits with their high gas prices, and they're not doing their part by whittling down their profit margins, are they?
No, it's absolute madness. The only thing they care about is themselves, right? Like if you just look at what the Exxon CEO said in January, he said he wasn't worried about increasing production. He was worried about profit per barrel. That's what they care about. And meanwhile, they take $20 billion from the American taxpayer every single year, and then they turn around and they don't they don't help us at the pump on that. They give that money back to shareholders through share buybacks or other things. They're doing $38 billion of share buybacks this year. And that money, that doesn't go to normal everyday people. Normal everyday people pay for that at the pump, and then that money goes to people who hold their stock, like the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, for example. Or, 1 in 4 members of Congress own fossil fuel stocks, so you can kind of see how nothing has changed. That's why members of Congress shouldn't own stock at all, and why we need a new plan to make sure that these excess profits go towards creating competition with oil companies so that they actually have to be competitive rather than taking our money and giving it to shareholders.
Well, there's been so much disdain for the suffering of working class people. High gas prices really hurt them, but I think a certain kind of liberal elite has taken the stance because of Ukraine, like, oh yeah, we got to do, like Kim said, we got to do our part, we got to do whatever we can. So it's fine. I'll gladly pay higher prices to for the cause, and that's totally fine. Well, it might be fine for you, but it's not fine for most normal, ordinary people.
Yeah, look, the job of our government is to provide for the common defense. And when I think about this, the price at the pump, that's not all that normal Americans are paying. Our Fifth Fleet, the U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet, spends tons of time in the Straits of Hormuz. We spend billions of dollars there every single year, keeping those straits open so that Exxon, Chevron, and others can extract oil from the Middle East. And you know where that oil goes? It goes to Asia, right? 76% of that goes to Asia. We are essentially paying to keep China's supply chains open so that these big oil companies who don't care about us, the old Exxon CEO once said, I'm not a U.S. company. I don't do what's in the interest of the United States. Like, it's so that they can profit, they can give to their shareholders. They say sacrifice at the pump, but they're not about sacrifice. Our sacrifice at the pump, it doesn't go to Ukraine. It doesn't help Ukraine. It goes to shareholders of these companies, and it goes to increasing their bottom line.
Well, it's funny because there was reports recently that Saudi Arabia is considering accepting yuan from China for Saudi oil, and the U.S. is fighting against that, saying that would undermine the U.S. petrodollar. It'd be funny to say, all right, fine, pay in yuan, but then you need your own naval fleet out there.
Yeah, that's right. Stop asking the American taxpayer to subsidize you. And that's what happens over and over again, right? When Western Europe was getting cheap gas from Russia, from 2014 onward, after Russia had already invaded Ukraine, they expected the American taxpayer to provide them a defense umbrella, right? We put more troops over there. I worked at the Pentagon. I was part of that. Like everybody wants the U.S. taxpayer to subsidize them, whether it's Western Europe, whether it's these oil companies and everything else. And like my biggest fear here, and I'm truly, truly concerned. I mean, we're talking about China right now, is we're not moving toward the next generation of energy, right? We're stuck subsidizing these oil companies. Meanwhile, Europe realizes that they need to move on. They're saying they want to expand into new technologies. And the country that is ahead of us on things like solar, wind, and others is China. So if we don't start investing in that, what we're looking at right now is trading a reliance on, Saudi and Russian authoritarians for a dependence on Chinese authoritarians, China, for our energy needs. And that's going to be an absolute tragedy. That is how we lose. It's how American taxpayers lose. And when our Constitution says that the role of the government is to provide for common defense, like what I'm talking about, and taking these excess profits and putting it in the next generation of energy, that is our common defense. That's our national security. And if we don't do it, we're going to lose to China.
Yeah. Well, there have been several reports predicting oil prices are actually going to level off in the coming weeks. I'm curious, do you buy that? Do you think gas prices are going to stay low or go higher?
It's hard to tell. I mean, we are run by a cartel right now. That cartel, they're not accountable to supply and demand. They're accountable to some public opinion and to politicians who they, generally speaking, buy off. And so what they're doing right now is they're making the calculation on where do we want the oil and gas prices to go so that, people like Lucas Koontz don't come in who aren't bought off by us, get traction with good policies, and actually do things that hurt our bottom line. And so I suspect, they're going to try to balance that line on public perception versus their profits. And whatever they do, though, it's not going to stop them from taking the $20 billion a year and then, from the American taxpayer and then giving $38 billion to their shareholders. They're going to stay on track for that.
And so I like the messaging of the 3-point plan that you laid out, but I want to get into the weeds on it for a second, because capping at a 5% profit feels a lot like something I'm sure you're very familiar with from your time in the military, cost plus contracting. So if Halliburton has, cost plus 5%, all of a sudden they figure out a way to make the soup that they just sold to the military cost $300, because then they get 5% of $300 rather than 5% of what the soup actually costs. So how do you design this in a world where you can actually legislate this? How do you design this in a way that doesn't push oil companies to drive prices as high as they can so that 5% is a higher figure for them?
Yeah, and so what we used to have at the Pentagon a long time ago was we had a robust contracting agency that knew what the cost was to do business, and they would analyze that and they could go after them. We had laws in place; those all got stripped out, and then defense contractors got allowed to run wild because they bought off our politicians. And so it's the exact same thing with the oil industry. I mean, you can tell if they're doing that or not. The real decision making here is just: are you going to enforce how it should be enforced? Or are you not going to do that? And so what I would say is, we just need to have the actuaries and the people in place to make sure that we can oversee that. It's not complicated. It's very simple. The complication comes in the industrial capture of the government because they're so big and they're so powerful. And again, when we talk about cost plus, that's exactly what we saw in the defense industry that we didn't used to have.
Yeah, I think maybe we should be nationalizing a bit of the oil. Personally,
just grab it all.
Well, not all of it, but I think if we nationalize some of it, then we'd have some competition.
Robbie, I'm surprised you're not for that.
Well, I think what we can do, and so if we take the money and we invest in the next generation of energy technology, and we put money into that, they're going to have competition. It's going to be competition from another sort of type of energy, but that will create competition. Right now, they have no competition. I mean, there's an international oil cartel, and then these guys are basically the colonists of that energy cartel. Yeah. And so what we're seeing is a situation where they can just do whatever they want. Yeah. And what I want is free market economy with true competition, so we can push the price down to what it should be. In a real free market, you don't give $38 billion in share buybacks every year. That's monopoly rents they're collecting and then redistribute.
That's what I want too. But we got to run. But Lucas, thank you so much for joining us. Lucas Koontz.
Hey, thanks, guys.
So up next, we discuss new reporting that digs into Hunter Biden's run-in with the IRS. Stick with us.